Week 10 is now in the books, so let's dive into some players that I'm looking to trade for right now. Starting with the Vikings running back Aaron Jones, who's 100% without a doubt the RB1 for the Minnesota Vikings across the board. Snaps, usage, volume, and of course, fantasy production. If you remove the Week 2 game against the Falcons when Jones was hurt and left early, he has been the majority snap leader in 3 out of 4 games, has out-touched Jordan Mason in all 4 games, and most importantly for us, is averaging 12 PPR fantasy points per game and has scored over 15 fantasy points in 2 of those 4 games. I think it's just obvious watching the Vikings backfield that Aaron Jones is just the better player. He's more explosive, he's more efficient, and a way better pass catcher than Jordan Mason. And even that it hasn't really translated to a ton of volume for Jones yet, he's still getting it done on his efficiency on lower volume. Moving forward, the Bears actually have the 8th easiest rest of season schedule for the running back position, with games against Chicago, Washington, Dallas, and the New York Giants, and then 2 tough matchups against the Packers in Week 12 and the Lions in Week 17 championship week. Though I will say he was fine against both teams last year due to his receiving ability and a couple of big runs thanks to his explosiveness. So he's not an auto start in those weeks, but if you really needed the running back help, he is startable in those bad matchups, and he is especially startable in the great matchups against Chicago, Washington, Dallas, and New York as 4 of his final 7 games. And that is why I want to be buying Aaron Jones right now as additional help for your running back room heading into and during the fantasy playoffs. I think the easiest way to buy Jones is to use some of your receiver depth if you have extra starters on your bench. Guys like Romeo Doubs or Troy Franklin, Josh Downs, Jacoby Myers, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy off a big week, maybe even Xavier Worthy, who has been really rough to try to play since Rashee Rice came back. Utilizing your wide receiver depth for a 1-to-1 straight move for Aaron Jones could just be the simplest way to go get him, or maybe you could also tier down from one of your wide receiver 2s for Jones plus another wide receiver. Guys like Zay Flowers, Devontae Smith, Cortland Sutton, or DK Metcalf for Aaron Jones plus a bench wide receiver or tight end if you needed one. At running back though, if you can move off of more short-term players like Kamani Vidal before Omarion Hampton is back, Rachaad White before Bucky is back, or Kyle Monangai, Zach Charbonnet, Kareem Hunt, I would definitely be doing that as well. I would also rather have Aaron Jones than Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, and possibly even J.K. Dobbins for the receiving upside that Jones has that Dobbins just doesn't in this Broncos offense. So go buy Aaron Jones if you need some extra running back help or just a better running back in general for a playoff push than the one that you currently have now. Sticking at the running back position though, I think it is about time that we consider trading for 2 fantasy RB1s when healthy. They're just unfortunately not healthy right now, but that is why we want to be trying to trade for him. It's Bucky Irving and Omarion Hampton. Now, trading for either player might only work for very specific teams that are already in the playoffs, essentially teams that are 7-3 or better right now. They have a strong team already, and buying one of these running backs is only going to make that team that much better for the championship push. Based on the news that we have today, it sounds like both running backs are still a couple of weeks away, with Bucky already announced as unlikely to play in Week 11, and then Omarion Hampton not expected to practice until after the Chargers' Week 12 bye. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to say that both are going to be back in Week 14, which in most leagues is the final week of the regular season before that first round of the playoffs. If they're back in Week 13, then that's fantastic. But for safety, let's just assume they're both back in Week 14. Bucky Irving's last 4 games are against the Saints, Falcons, Panthers, and Dolphins, which are all average to even below average matchups. But that Week 17 game against the Dolphins is one of the best that week, especially for running backs that we would actually be ranking in the top 10 for championship week. Hampton's last 4 games are against the Eagles, Chiefs, Cowboys, and Texans. So 2 good to even great matchups, and then 2 bad matchups, including Week 17 against the Houston Texans, which is one of the more difficult matchups for championship week on paper, but they are beatable for solid production, just not the monster explosive game. Almost every running back that they faced this year has scored at least 12 PPR fantasy points, if not more like 14 to 16 PPR points. They just haven't allowed a 20-point game yet this season. So good games, but not explosively weak winning type of games that the Texans have allowed. So like I said, this advice is tailored for more of the teams that are pretty much already in the playoffs, especially the ones who are trending for that first round bye, which would be incredible to add a player like Hampton or Bucky to a team that is that good already, especially if they're coming in as your RB2 or your flex player for the playoffs. That is incredible for the floor-ceiling combo that they give you as workhorse running backs in great offenses against mostly solid matchups. The key then is just what do you give up for both of these guys right now? If you're looking at pivoting off of running backs, I would be looking at a foundation of a deal being around a mid-level RB2 who has a good floor, but not really much of a ceiling. Someone with good production right now that a team with Bucky or Hampton might want to then stack some wins right now to still try to keep their playoff hopes alive while they don't really have their stud running back in Hampton or Bucky because they're hurt. These are guys like Jalen Warren, Chase Brown, Kenneth Walker, or J.K. Dobbins. You'll probably have to add something to these guys, but again, these are the guys that I would consider centering a deal around to pivot from them over to Bucky or Hampton for your playoff push. I would also consider deals pivoting from Travis Etienne and Quinshon Judkins if your team is that good, because you drafted those guys in round 9 or 10. So if you drafted well before you drafted them and your team really is that good, you might be able to upgrade either your tight end, your quarterback, or your wide receiver spot by moving off of Etienne or Judkins, moving over to Bucky or Hampton now because of their injuries. Same thing goes for the wide receiver position. If you hit on or maybe even added off the waiver wire, guys like Quentin Johnston or Alec Pierce or Jameson Williams after 2 big games in a row for him, those high upside but kind of low floor guys can also be moved as part of a deal for Bucky or Hampton for that fantasy championship run. And finally, at wide receiver, I'm looking at Giants wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson because I don't know if people realize what he's been doing since Malik Nabers' injury. Over the last 6 games, Wan'Dale's on pace for 147 targets, 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 13 PPR points per game as the wide receiver 24 over that stretch, and has outscored players like Marvin Harrison Jr., Tedero McMillan, Brian Thomas Jr., and Rome Odunze, and is less than a point per game behind Justin Jefferson since week 5. He has seen 7 or more targets in all but 1 game and 11 or more targets in half of his games. His only issue is touchdowns because he's just not a red zone or touchdown guy because of his size. But everything else is right there from a PPR standpoint as a very nice floor play with moderate upside if he catches 7 or 8 passes for like 80 or 90 yards. That's a very good PPR day without scoring a touchdown. The Giants also have the 3rd easiest rest of season schedule among all wide receivers. Pretty much every matchup moving forward is shaded green for Wan'Dale Robinson. And for those of you who play Week 18 championships, well, Wan'Dale gets the Dallas Cowboys this week, which doesn't help any of us normal Week 17 people, but if you do play in Week 18 and you have Wan'Dale Robinson, congratulations on the fantastic matchup. The only scheduling issue for Robinson is a Week 14 bye, but if you're buying Wan'Dale as a kind of bench guy to maybe flex in your lineup if you needed him, a Week 14 bye shouldn't be that impactful to your entire roster. But perhaps the best part, he really shouldn't be hard to get. I would rather have Wan'Dale Robinson than other receivers like Romeo Doubs, Xavier Worthy, Rashid Shaheed, Troy Franklin, Keenan Allen, and honestly, even Brian Thomas Jr. at this point. If you wanted to make a larger deal to upgrade a different position and pivot to Wan'Dale from wide receivers like Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, Jordan Addison, Debo, Devonta Smith, Quentin Johnston, guys like that, I don't mind that either because Wan'Dale has pretty much outproduced all of them on a points per game basis over the last month because he's just so involved as the Giants wide receiver 1 that the production has been and will continue following that usage. And who knows, maybe we see some positive touchdown regression for Wan'Dale similar to what we saw with Ladd McConkey when I told everybody to buy him at the end of September. If Wan'Dale Robinson is continuing to see 10 plus targets a game consistently, he probably can fall into the end zone a couple of times the end of the year, making him an even better buy than he already is. But if you're looking for some help with defenses or kickers to stream this week or even for the rest of the season, I highly recommend checking out Caleb's videos from earlier this week right up here.